Thank you for staying tuned. As we promised, tonight you're having Professor David Minja, who is the chairman of the Department of Public Policy and Administration here in Kenyatta University, to talk about issues of accountability and transparency. Welcome, Professor Minja.
Thank you, and good evening.
All right. Now, first thing first, let's look at how the tendency has been since 1963 when we got into independence. Of course, the issue of accountability and transparency is not something new. It has been something that we have been focusing on year on year on. And there's been a question that in this country, the issue of making sure that our leaders are accountable and our public institutions are accountable has been a tall order. Why do you think this has been the case years on?
Thank you. I think for me, most people have not understood what accountability is all about. It is a phrase that has become common. Accountability, transparency. But if you ask somebody, what does it mean to be accountable? Perhaps they will not actually explain to you what that entails. Because accountability entails giving an account with regard to certain expected obligations that you're supposed to perform. And most people do not think that as leaders, they are required to give an account to the voters, to the citizen, in light of the expectations they have from them as leaders. And therefore, that makes it a tall order, even for the leader himself or herself to actually be accountable. Because at times, they think theirs is just to ask for votes and perhaps influence people and have a big following, but they don't know that actually, with accountability, they're supposed to have certain tasks and certain jobs done on behalf of the citizens, and then come back to the citizens and give an account of what they have done for the period they have been given that responsibility to lead the people, be it at constituency level or at ward level, whatever level. They must give an account of what they do, but they don't. So it becomes a tall order. Secondly, our culture is one where, again, we don't value owning up and giving account of what we are doing. And especially if I'm the leader, why should you ask me to account for my behavior and my actions and my values? Yet we have put you there in that position as our leader, and we expect you to be above board. We expect you not to behave like anybody else you are leading. You have to be an example. So again, our culture has played a key role in terms of not helping us become that accountable. Actually, even some debates have been furthered in the sense that some people believe we don't even have a leadership culture, a culture that promotes good leadership. So that perhaps is a discourse that has to take place, and people must sit and ask themselves, do we have really a culture that promotes integrity and accountability, not only amongst our leaders, but amongst all of us citizens of this country?
All right. Now, talking about that and talking about the culture, we have had the Jubilee regime during the first term in government. They had given promises through manifestos. We had the Kibaki regime. We had the Moi regime. But some people have claimed, even as leaders come out to give out their manifesto, we do not have really a clear structure of how we should put them into account. And the common mwananchi is not, there isn't much capacity building and creating awareness of how we can question the issue of implementing the manifesto and the issue of making sure what they promise they deliver. Do you perhaps think that lack of structure has costed us in that particular aspect?
Well, I do believe that there is a legal structure, there is a legal framework on which to operate. So the law is clear. We have a constitution. We have laws that tell them you have to be accountable and you have to be responsible for your actions. Take for example, Chapter 6, Article 73, Section 2D, talks about what the responsibility that public officers must be accountable and responsible for their actions. So the law is clear.
Yeah.
However, and even the implementation of that law, we have acts of parliament that help implementation of Chapter 6. For example, we have Leadership and Integrity Act of 2012.
Yeah.
We have Public Officers Ethics Act 2003, and several other laws that have been enacted. All those are meant to enhance accountability and have responsible leaders who serve the people. However, when it comes to the actual implementation, that's where the problem is. The structure is clear. The law is clear. So you would say the framework is there. But the implementation is where we have a problem. Why? Going back to what I said earlier, culture, the culture that has been there since independence. And also I would add, we don't have symbolic leadership. Leadership that actually is a symbol of integrity, accountability, people who walk the talk.
So there are no leaders to emulate.
Yes.
So to speak.
We don't have role models,
All right.
so to say. That's the kind of symbolic leadership that I'm talking about. If we had leaders who actually stood and said, here in this country, if I'm a CS in my ministry, accountability is a value that we have to uphold, whether you like it or not, and it has to be done. I guess that can happen.
Right.
Yeah. So leadership must play a key role in having everybody else to the line.
All right. Non-governmental organization and activists have come up to say that we need to create a culture. We need to ensure that we find a way of navigating to ensure that we instill the culture of making sure that our leaders are accountable. But the question has been, where do we start? How do we make sure that we make progress in terms of ensuring accountability? Because the rot is too much that some non-governmental organization or activists have lost hope in the midst of the way, given that a majority of the people, a majority of the leader or culture, as you have put it, has somewhat created a room or an environment for us to not even care whether our leaders are accountable and whether the institutions are really transparent in their mandate.
Yeah, you have asked a very important question. Where do we start? We must agree and accept that we need to create a new culture.
Right.
And when we talk about a culture, we need to talk about what values are we going to hold? What beliefs are we going to have as Kenyans? Because culture constitutes what beliefs, values, and even some assumptions that we hold that are wrong, and yet we hold them as truths. That when one of us, for example, is arrested for having misappropriated funds, we will say, we are targeted.
Yeah.
So the assumption is, if one of us is in the wrong, we are there to protect one of us regardless of what they did. And you see, that one is not written anywhere, but it is within our fabric. So the place to start is to ask ourselves, in the current setup, the current culture that we have, what are some of the things that we need to lose? And what kind of new culture are we going to establish? So that when we have those two, then we can establish what I would call a culture gap. That there is a gap between our aspirations of a good culture that upholds values and where we are, and we are not happy with the level in which we are. So that gap, then we ask ourselves, how do we bridge the gap? All of us, not leaders.
Yeah.
It must start with us, because we, let me say, supposedly we are the people who put those leaders in those positions, by virtue of voting them. So if that's the case, then we have to sit down with our leaders and agree and discuss and say, we do not like what we are doing. We believe if we did this, Kenya would be different. Our society would be different. So what do we do now to bridge the gap? That must be not only participative, but must be owned by everybody. the citizens and the leaders, who are also citizens of this country. All of us must own the process from where we are to where we are going. And we move together. And as we move together, because we have the leaders, we continue keeping them, holding them accountable. They must give an account. This time, the obligation is to move us from our current level of culture, our current culture that is not good, to this that we have envisaged and said, if we created this new culture, our community, our country would be different.
All right. Yeah. You have put really an important point of citizens and leaders coming together. Yeah. But here in Kenya, the issue has been that once we elect a member of parliament, let's say, for example, the member of parliament for Ruiru, once he gets into parliament, you will never see that member of parliament in the constituency. That has been the tendency, and Kenyans have really complained about that. Therefore, the interaction between citizens and the leaders is not really there. Because you will hear members of parliament complain that when I go to my constituency, they're always, calling me for Harambee. There are those, even when the time that Parliament goes for recess, the leaders who do not go back to their constituency. And therefore, there isn't that much interaction between the leaders and the citizen. Do you think when it comes to that particular aspect, when we see that the leaders are not doing their mandate, they should be recalled according to their standing orders and the law?
Yes, that should happen. However, the citizens must first of all say, or the voters in that jurisdiction, if it's a ward or a constituency, they must actually have facts and say, we sat with our leader. We agreed. Remember, it's accountability, giving an account. We agreed using very specific and tangible metrics that our MP or MCA was to do 1, 2, 3 by this time. Now, if they fail to do that, you have a case. Let me give you an example, very practical example. In my ward, all those aspirants that volunteered themselves in 2017, we called them for a debate in a hall. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was a moderator, so I can tell you for a fact that happened. So and the churches provided the platform. So we had all those aspirants coming, and we had questions and interviews for each of them. They were lined up just the way you see presidential debates. That's the kind of debate we had. And we asked them, do you know what our issues are? Not you telling us what you want to do for us. We don't want you to tell us, but do you know what our issues are? And of course, all of them came up with various issues. Then what are you going to do if we give you the votes? Today, our MCA keeps asking us whenever we meet in the streets, am I doing what I promised that I would do? And I can tell you that our MC is doing quite a lot, something that had not been done by the previous MCAs, because he knows there was a day he came before us and we asked him to tell us what he would do. And that's how he got the votes. So for me, I think the problem goes back to us. We talked about, you had said earlier that sometimes citizens do not know what they're supposed to do. But if you knew that you have an obligation to task your leader, to tell them what you want done within the resources that are available, then if they fail to do that, they have to answer. And you have a reason to tell them, next time, we are not going to give you vote. Or, like you said, we can recall you. Of course, that in Kenya is more theoretical than practical.
Yeah, it's far-reaching.
But but the law is clear, yes. We have a provision for that, though it has not worked before. However, what I know is that if it's an MP, you tell him or her, we agreed this is what you are going to do in 5 years. And if since it is on a yearly basis, you have to be giving us a scorecard on yearly basis, what you are doing for us. If that happens, then these people will wake up. If you call them for the first year and tell them now year 1 has ended, can you come and give us your
account.
scorecard. What have you done? That way, they will wake up and start doing what they're supposed to be, what is supposed to be done. Because they know even if they come with money later on, we will not take their money as we want results. Because accountability has to do with results. You must show tangible results that are measurable, not just things that are fuzzy.
All right.
Yeah.
Now let us focus on what is happening right now. Okay, in the country, more than 5 governors have been charged with corruption cases. The recent one being Garissa Governor Ali Korane, concerning the issue of misuse of grant money that was given by the World Bank. And now the concern has been that even as we talk about accountability and transparency, it is really linked up to the issue of leadership and integrity. And not only the issue of governors, you have seen KEMSA, one of the institution charged with ensuring that counties get the medical supplies. They've been accused of graft, actually the COVID-19 money, and that has caused an outcry. And the question has been, 10 years on, when you look at our constitution, we have the chapter 6, which is leadership and integrity, but it has remained to be only a chapter in the constitution. Where do you think we're losing it when it comes to public institution failing, and leaders who we have put into position now come out as people who cost us as a nation?
One, we could say there is a culture, going back to culture of impunity.
All right.
That so-and-so did this, nothing happened to them. Or they went in for 2 days, they were released, went back and enjoyed the money. But if we made corruption and abuse of office very expensive in this country, so that there is no money that would equate the kind of price you'd pay for having violated those values of leadership and integrity and ethics, then perhaps that would start changing. What I'm saying is that it has to be very painful for anybody who engages in corruption or abuse of office, so that even when they're doing it, they know they're taking a very high risk. But I guess in Kenya, it's not very risky to be corrupt, because as long as you have the money, they say you can always buy your way out.
All right.
Yes, so that becomes the challenge.
Which brings me to my question, whereby do you think now there has been the term that activists have used, and even leaders, policy experts who have said that when you look at our culture, which you've mentioned, is that the political class and political leaders are immune to some of the laws put in place, even as we say that no one is above the rule of law. Looking at how it is, even as we see governors go before court facing their corruption charges, it somehow seems as if nothing really will happen, even as, you know, they continue going to answer charges against them.
Yes, you put it right. There is that perceived immunity in terms of not our leaders being held responsible for their actions for as long as they hold those senior positions. But going back to what I called symbolic leadership, if top leadership there supported the crusade against corruption, and it ceases just to be one person, but this leader builds a critical mass of champions who are like-minded and ethical, and they are able to gather a critical mass of people, I think that's the place to start. But now when you only have perhaps one person fighting corruption against 1,000, you'll find that you'll be overwhelmed. So yes, I wouldn't want to call it political immunity. I would want to call it weak leadership that is unable to deal with this culture of corruption. It boils down to leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. If leadership is weak in a certain area, of course, that area will suffer. And in our context, in the Kenyan context, the area is actually corruption.
All right.
Yeah.
Talking about weak leadership, do you think President Uhuru Kenyatta has really failed when it comes to ensuring that leaders are questionable. Of course, we say that a person is innocent until proven guilty. But in terms of cabinet ministers and leaders of institutions who have been accused of corruption, why have you not seen the president being on the forefront to call the leaders to resign? Case example being the Health Cabinet Secretary Mutahi Kagwe, who has been on the limelight given that his ministry has been accused of embezzling money meant for COVID-19 patients.
Maybe it's not in Africa, until you are jailed, that's when you believe you're guilty, and that's the perception that we have as Africans. In other cultures, once you have been mentioned, you step aside.
All right.
And when you are exonerated, you go back to your office. So if I were the one, I wouldn't say whether he has failed or success, but the jury is out there. But if I were the president, and my minister or any other senior government official is accused of being corrupt, even if it has not been proved, I'll say, because you're tarnishing the name of my good government, step aside. I'll just ask you to do that. Step aside. Once you're exonerated, your job is back. And I'm not going to replace you for as long as the case is going on. Once you've been declared innocent, you go back. Because the minute you allow someone who is tainted to continue working in your system, whether they are guilty or not, remember, a leader is supposed to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. So once one of your leaders is found to have some level of reproach, the whole government is tainted. So the best thing, even for you to prove that you mean business, you ask them to step aside. Don't replace them. And once the whole legal process has been completed, if they're exonerated, they go back. Of course, if they're found guilty, then you can replace them and they can be punished. So the other thing is there's something that is being perceived as even this fight against corruption is a bit impartial. So again, as a leader, I must show that there is a high degree of impartiality in terms of fighting graft and corruption, so that there are no sacred cows. You know, the danger with the sacred cow is that it only gives you milk. It will never give you meat. So, but if I were the leader, I will slaughter the sacred cow. Yeah.
All right. Now, finally, because we are pressed on time, do you think constitutional bodies, given the mandate to investigate these particular cases, case example being the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the prosecution officers, do you think they have failed? Because our legal process is quite long. We have seen the likes of Kiambu Governor Ferdinand Waititu, who was impeached, but up until now, who is a former governor of Kiambu County, was impeached, but up until now, he hasn't really been able to answer to the charges against him. So where you sit, do you think they have totally failed in ensuring that the corruption dragon is slayed?
The challenge with our system is that the Constitution gives them rights to defend themselves. And it can take quite a long time before it is established that they are actually guilty. So DPP can go and present his case, a very strong case, and he has evidence, but because you have to convince the judge using the law that this person is actually guilty, then it takes forever. Finally, hoping that the whole process will be flawless, this person will be found guilty and they'll be punished for their misdeeds. But you see, it has taken long. But as citizens, we want a person to be arrested today, and in a week's time, they are in jail, which is not possible within our legal framework, because people have rights, have legal rights, and they have to exercise those rights. So I wouldn't say they have failed, but where they are also being seen as impartial in one way or another, that is where they have to guard against.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor David Minja, for making time and giving us a perspective concerning the issue of accountability and transparency here in Kenya, given that it is not really a culture, as you have said, that is quite inculcated all over the country. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
All right.
My pleasure.
All right. All right, that has been Professor David Minja. He is the chairman of the Public Policy and Administration here in Kenyatta University, of course, giving us a perspective of what is ailing us when it comes to accountability and transparency, the issue of culture, the issue of citizens, making sure their leaders are accountable. We are taking a short break. Don't touch that dial.